What are you doing with my children?
A voice as sharp as a blade slices through the damp air. That is Elias Grant, billionaire, power broker, and a father who has just realized he has lost his children. The basement door swings open. The flickering light reveals a scene almost too surreal to believe. On the cold concrete floor lies Henry, the building's black janitor, and in his arms are Mara and Jonah, Elias's two children, curled up in a worn, frayed blanket, sleeping in a peace that feels almost unreal. In the silence, a small voice breaks through, warm and drowsy. Daddy. But that word is not meant for their billionaire father. Mara only burrows deeper into Henry's chest. One word, just one word, yet it cuts straight through the pride of Elias Grant. It is an accusation for thousands of missed dinners, for hundreds of broken promises. It is the brutal truth that, in his daughter's nightmare, the one who brought her safety was not him, but a janitor whose name he could barely remember. A flash of lightning outside illuminates a small detail on the blanket. Two hand-stitched letters, faded with time. R.C. What is this mystery? And why is this man here, with his children, on a stormy night? Have you ever wondered what could make a man who has everything feel jealous of someone who has nothing? Stay with us, because this is not just a story about what happened in this basement. It is a journey of reclaiming dignity, of justice that does not need to be loud, and of the power of kindness strong enough to shake an empire. If you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, take 1 second to click the subscribe button. It is not just a click. It is a signal to us that you are here and that you believe in it too. And our story begins right here, in a cold basement where a billionaire, for the first time in his life, felt like the poorest man alive. The rain hammered against the glass walls of the Grant Corporation tower, the storm outside matching the relentless pace inside. On the top floor, in a corner office that seemed more like a command center than a workspace, Elias Grant sat behind a sleek black desk. His fingers moved over the keyboard with precision, signing off on the last of a dozen late-night contracts. The glow of his laptop reflected in his eyes, hiding the fatigue behind them. Elias had built this empire from the ground up. Every inch of the glass and steel tower was a monument to his ambition. But in the quiet moments between meetings and mergers, there was a silence that no victory could fill. Tonight, that silence was waiting for him at home. A soft knock at the door broke through the tapping of keys. Ivy, his executive assistant, stepped in. She was efficient as ever, her dark hair pulled back, her tailored suit immaculate. She held a tablet in one hand and her phone in the other. "Sir, the driver is downstairs. The children are waiting in the lobby," she said. Her tone was calm, professional, but there was a flicker of hesitation in her eyes. Elias didn't look up. "Tell him I'll be there shortly," he replied, his focus still on the contract in front of him. "They've been waiting for 20 minutes, Ivy added, her voice softening just slightly. Elias glanced at the clock but didn't stop typing. "I'm almost done." Ivy's lips pressed into a thin line. She had worked for Elias long enough to know what "almost" meant in his language. At least another 30 minutes, maybe more. She turned to leave but hesitated. "It's Thursday," she reminded him quietly. "Family dinner night." The words hung in the air like a challenge he didn't want to acknowledge. From the open doorway, another voice cut in, smooth, deep, and laced with a hint of amusement. "Careful, Ivy. You'll give him the impression that family time is more important than sealing a multi-million-dollar deal." Victor Hale stepped into the room. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of tailored suit that whispered old money, Victor was both Elias's business partner and the closest thing he had to a rival. He carried himself like a man who was always in on the joke that no one else knew. "Victor," Elias greeted curtly, still typing. Victor strolled to the window, hands in his pockets, looking out at the rain. "You know, I passed the kids downstairs on my way in. Poor things, sitting there with their little backpacks, watching the clock. Jonah kept asking the driver if you were coming. Mara just kept staring at the door. Elias's hands slowed, but he didn't look up. Victor smirked, his reflection in the glass catching the faintest glint of something sharper than humor. Don't miss dinner again, Elias. One day you'll look up from that laptop and realize you've built a kingdom, but lost your heirs. The jab landed, though Elias didn't show it. Victor had always known where to aim. Good night, Victor, Elias said flatly. Victor lingered a moment longer, then shrugged and left, his footsteps fading down the hall. Ivy shifted uneasily. Sir, I can have the driver take them home without you. The nanny can— No, Elias interrupted, finally closing his laptop. I'll go. But even as he rose from his chair, his phone buzzed. Another contract needed his attention. Another fire to put out. Another reason to stay. He hesitated just long enough for the moment to pass, then tucked the phone into his pocket. Down in the lobby, Mara and Jonah sat side by side on a leather bench, the lobby's grand chandelier casting warm light over their small frames. Mara clutched her sketchbook, drawing in quiet concentration. Jonah fidgeted with the zipper on his jacket, glancing toward the elevator every few seconds. Outside, the rain fell harder, streaking the glass doors with silver lines. A clap of thunder made Jonah jump. Mara put a hand on his arm, giving him a reassuring smile. In the back of the lobby, Henry moved silently, pushing a mop across the marble floor. He noticed the children, his eyes softening. The storm was loud, but there was something louder in the stillness between them, a kind of waiting that felt heavy. Upstairs, Elias was stepping into the elevator at last, the polished steel doors closing around him. He told himself he was doing the right thing, that deals didn't wait, that sacrifices had to be made for success. But in the reflection of the elevator's mirrored walls, he caught a glimpse of his own eyes. They looked tired, and for a fleeting second, he wondered if Victor was right. The elevator descended. Each floor passed in silence, each number a reminder that his children had been waiting too long. He didn't know it yet, but by the end of the night, that wait would change everything. The lobby felt cavernous at night. The golden chandelier above cast warm light on the marble floor, but to Mara and Jonah, it did nothing to quiet the low rumble of thunder rolling in from outside. Mara hugged her sketchbook to her chest. Jonah sat close beside her, fidgeting with the zipper of his jacket, glancing at the elevator doors every few seconds. The driver had already offered to take them home, but Mara had shaken her head. "Dad's coming," she had whispered, more to herself than to Jonah. Another clap of thunder cracked through the air. Jonah flinched, his small shoulders tensing. Mara reached over, placing her hand on his arm like she had done so many times before. "It's just a storm," she said softly. But her own eyes darted to the glass doors, where rain streaked down in relentless silver lines. Somewhere behind them, the sound of a floor buffer shut off. Henry, the janitor, leaned on the handle of his mop for a moment, watching the two children. He had seen them here before, waiting, always waiting. Jonah stood suddenly. "Maybe we can find him," he suggested. His voice was a mix of hope and impatience. Mara hesitated but followed when Jonah started toward the elevators. The lobby was large enough to make them feel small, and the storm outside only added to the sense of urgency in their steps. The elevator doors opened with a chime. Jonah pressed a button at random, not knowing that the basement level required a key card. The elevator hummed as it descended, bypassing the familiar floors they knew, sinking deeper until the doors opened to a dim, concrete hallway. The air down here was cooler, carrying a faint smell of oil and damp stone. The light flickered overhead. Jonah stepped out first, curiosity tugging him forward. Mara trailed behind, her sneakers squeaking on the floor. They wandered past stacks of crates and the hum of old machinery, the storm above now muffled to a distant growl. Jonah peeked into a storage room, then another, until they reached a wide open space with an old boiler against one wall. The ground was bare concrete, cold under their feet. A sudden flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a deep roll of thunder that made Mara jump. Her sketchbook slipped from her arms, scattering a few loose pages across the floor. Jonah bent to help her, but she shook her head. She could feel the chill settling in. Footsteps approached. Henry emerged from around the corner, his mop set aside. His expression shifted from mild surprise to quiet concern when he saw them. He knelt down to their level. "You two shouldn't be here," he said gently, his deep voice steady and calm. "It's cold, and your father's probably looking for you." Mara bit her lip, unsure how to respond. Jonah's eyes darted toward the elevator, but a new crash of thunder froze him in place. Henry glanced around, then moved toward a small storage cabinet. From it, he pulled out a folded blanket. Old, but clean. It was thick, with frayed edges and a faded embroidery on one corner. 2 letters stitched by hand. R.C. "Here," Henry said softly, unfolding the blanket and draping it over their small shoulders. The warmth settled over them instantly. "Just until the storm eases up." Mara looked down at the stitched letters, tracing them lightly with her fingers. She didn't ask what they meant, but she noticed the way Henry's hand lingered on the edge of the blanket for a moment before pulling back. From across the open space, Ivy stood partially hidden behind a column. She had followed the children, intending to bring them back upstairs, but what she saw made her stop. Henry, the janitor, sitting with them on the cold floor, the 2 children leaning against him as though they had known him forever. Her first instinct wasn't warmth, it was alarm. In her world, perception was everything, and this was the kind of image that could spiral into scandal if the wrong person saw it. The press would twist it. Competitors would weaponize it. And above all, it could damage Elias's carefully curated reputation. Ivy's hand tightened on her phone. For a moment, she considered taking a picture, not for gossip, but for evidence should anyone else see them. But then Mara's voice broke through the dim light. "It's warm," the little girl murmured, her head resting against Henry's chest. Jonah was already half asleep beside her, the blanket pulled up to his chin. Henry gave a small smile, the kind that held both kindness and sorrow. "You're safe," he said. Ivy exhaled slowly, lowering her phone. She wasn't sure what to make of the scene. Something about it felt wrong to interrupt, yet dangerous to leave alone. She stepped back, her heels clicking softly against the floor as she turned away. Henry sat quietly with the children as the minutes passed, the storm above continuing its relentless song. He didn't move until their breathing had evened out, the blanket still wrapped tight around them. He didn't know that in just a few more minutes the peace in this basement would be shattered by the sharp voice of their father. And Ivy didn't. Know that the moment she just witnessed would become the spark for a storm far greater than the one outside. The words from Victor Hale still echoed in Elias's mind as he left the boardroom. "Don't miss dinner again," Victor had said with that sharp little smirk that always felt like a knife disguised as a smile. Elias had dismissed it at first, but as he walked down the glass corridor toward his office, the echo grew heavier. He checked his watch. The driver should have taken Mara and Jonah home by now, but the lobby's security feed flashed briefly on a nearby monitor, and something caught his eye. 2 small figures stepping into the elevator without the driver. A prickle of unease crawled up the back of his neck. He told himself they were fine. But then another voice, quieter, pressed into him. What if they weren't? Elias turned sharply, bypassing his office entirely and heading for the elevator. His polished shoes clicked against the marble, the sound too loud in the empty corridor. The elevator's descent felt painfully slow, each floor passing like a stalled heartbeat. When the doors finally opened to the basement, a cold draft brushed past his face. He stepped out, scanning the dimly lit space. The hum of the boiler filled the silence. Then he saw them. In the middle of the concrete floor sat Henry, the black janitor who rarely spoke, who blended into the edges of the building's daily life, leaning against a support beam. Wrapped in his arms, tucked securely under a worn blanket, were Mara and Jonah. Elias froze. Mara's head rested against Henry's chest, her tiny hand clutching the edge of the blanket. Jonah was curled against Henry's side, already asleep. Their faces were relaxed, their breathing slow and even, as if the storm outside had no power here. And then Mara stirred. Her voice was drowsy, warm, carrying the unguarded tenderness of a child's dream. "Daddy." But she didn't open her eyes. She didn't turn toward Elias. She only nestled deeper into Henry's arms. The single word landed in Elias like a blade. His first instinct was defensive. This was his daughter, his son. But beneath that was something stranger, something that burned in the chest. Jealousy. Not of Henry's presence, but of the fact that in this moment, the man his children reached for was not him. Henry looked up, his expression calm, not startled, as if he had been expecting someone to come. "They were cold," he said quietly. "I found them wandering." Elias's voice was colder than the basement air. "And you thought this was appropriate?" "They needed warmth," Henry replied simply. He didn't stand. He didn't shift. The words weren't defensive, just factual, as though no explanation beyond that was necessary. Elias stepped closer. His eyes caught on something. The blanket. Along the frayed edge, 2 faded letters were stitched in neat, almost childlike embroidery. R. C. The thread was worn, the color dulled, but the initials were clear. From the shadows behind a nearby column, Ivy had been watching. She had followed Elias down, her phone in hand, prepared to manage whatever public relations nightmare this could become. But when her gaze fell on those initials, something in her paused. R.C. She didn't know what they meant, but she filed it away in her mind. Objects like that rarely belonged in scenes like this without a story attached. Elias looked from the blanket to Henry, wanting to demand answers but held back by something he couldn't name. "Bring them upstairs," he said finally, the authority in his tone muted by the image still burning in his mind, his daughter calling another man Daddy. Henry nodded once, then rose, carrying Jonah while keeping the blanket wrapped around Mara. Elias watched them walk toward the elevator, his jaw tight. Behind him, Ivy's voice was cautious. "That blanket. Do you know what RC stands for?" Elias didn't answer, but Ivy saw the way his gaze lingered, as though the question had already taken root somewhere deeper than he wanted to admit. The storm outside roared again, but inside, something far more dangerous had begun to stir. That night, long after the building had emptied, Henry stayed in the basement. The hum of the boiler was steady, almost comforting. He sat with the blanket folded neatly beside him, fingers brushing over the frayed embroidery. R.C. Ruth Cole. The memory was not a flash but a slow, steady ache. Years ago, before the janitor's uniform, before the quiet life in the shadows, Henry had worn a different kind of work gear, engineer's coveralls. He had been a mechanical engineer for a defense contractor, specializing in safety systems for high-stress environments. His designs were meticulous, his calculations flawless. But in that world, not everything was built with integrity. Ruth had been 8 when the fire happened. It was in a new housing development, a project Henry had worked on indirectly. He had designed the emergency ventilation for the boiler systems. But the contractor, eager to cut costs, had used cheaper materials, ignoring safety warnings. The name on the final approval forms was one Henry recognized later, Victor Hale. The fire spread faster than it should have. The alarms failed. By the time rescue teams arrived, the smoke had already claimed too much. Henry had been out of town on a work assignment. He came back to a charred frame where his daughter's room had been, and a folded blanket found near what remained of her bed. This blanket. Ruth had stitched her initials into it during a summer camp the year before. The investigation had been slow, buried under legal settlements and corporate shields. Henry had pushed, demanded accountability, but every door he knocked on closed quickly. The official reports named it an accident. To Henry, it was theft, not just of a life, but of truth. He left the industry soon after. There was no satisfaction in designing for companies that treated human lives as expendable. The degree, the accolades, the patents, they meant nothing without her. So he disappeared. Took jobs where no one asked questions about resumes. Mopped floors, changed light bulbs, cleaned the messes left behind by people who didn't see him. In the quiet hours between shifts, he kept the blanket close. Not as a shrine, but as a promise. When he saw Mara and Jonah shivering on the basement floor tonight, there had been no hesitation. The blanket was the only thing in his life that had ever meant safety, and safety was something he would never withhold from a child. Upstairs, Elias might have seen only a man in overalls holding his children. Ivy might have seen a potential scandal, but in that basement for Henry, the moment had been something else entirely. It had been a chance, brief and unasked for, to keep a promise he had made years ago, that no child in his presence would ever feel unprotected again. What Henry didn't know yet was that the past he had tried so hard to bury, the initials on the blanket, the name Victor Hale, was about to resurface. And this time, it wouldn't just threaten his quiet life. It would pull him into a fight that could dismantle more than one man's empire. The storm that had rattled the lobby now pressed against the tower like a thing. Wind hit the glass. Rain drove sideways, and above the roof, lightning split the sky. Inside, the lights dipped once, twice, then steadied. On the 42nd floor, status monitors in the alcove flickered from green to amber. Ivy saw the alert first. Power fluctuations detected. Battery reserves at risk. Cooling variance rising. She lifted her phone, then ran. Heels on the corridor, she reached Elias's office. He was already standing, jacket on, keys in hand, ready to head downstairs and make amends for dinner missed. "Server room," she said. "If we lose cooling, we lose the arrays." Elias hesitated only a breath, then pivoted. "Call facilities. Meet me there." Down 2 flight stairs, past framed photos of groundbreakings and ribbon cuttings, the air grew warmer and louder. The server room sat behind a glass wall like an aquarium, racks stacked in black pillars, blue LEDs blinking in a rhythm. A thin fog hovered near the floor. Condensation lines bled vapor. Somewhere inside, a chiller coughed. A technician fumbled with a tablet. "UPS is holding, but the load is ugly. The chiller is spiking. If it trips, we are done." Elias moved to the glass. He knew numbers and risk, contracts and trust. He did not know how to put a hand into that humming forest and make it obey. Helplessness pressed at his ribs. Henry appeared at the end of the hall, uniform damp from the bays. He did not hurry, arrived quickly. Ivy looked from him to the tech, unsure. The tech answered the look. "We need a manual flow bypass. No power cycle." Henry nodded. "All loop has a hand valve. Show me the panel." Elias keyed the door. Heat slammed them. Fans whined. The floor vibrated. Henry went straight to a stainless cabinet, opened it, traced the copper lines with a fingertip like a reader tracing a map. He checked the readout, then the fog pooling across the tiles. "Negative pressure is pulling warm air into the cold aisle," he said. "Open the crossvent 2 turns. Put cabinet fans to manual. We will bleed heat until the chiller catches." The tech obeyed, hands shaking. Ivy watched the numbers. 93 degrees inlet dropped to 91, then 90. The amber squares on the dashboard softened. Henry crouched, popped a tile with the suction tool, and slid it aside. Warm air breathed up his sleeve. He reached into the subfloor, adjusted a damper by feel, then tightened a sweating clamp with a small wrench from his pocket. When he stood, his forearms shone with condensation. "Give me 60 seconds. he said, then push the bypass. The chiller barked, stuttered, then found rhythm. Fog thinned. LEDs steadied. The technician exhaled a wordless prayer. Elias finally spoke. "How did you know what to reach for?" Henry wiped his hands on a folded rag. "Air and water tell you what they want if you let them. This room was asking to breathe." Ivy stared. "Were you trained on this system?" "Not this one," Henry said. "One like it. Long ago." He scanned for red indicators, replaced the floor tile, shut the cabinet, and set the suction tool exactly where he found it, handle aligned with the edge like a small, private ritual of respect. The technician looked to Elias. "We are stable. We could have lost this sand. He saved it." Elias studied Henry's hands. Thick through the palm, nicked along the knuckles, hands that knew torque and temperature by feel. They were the opposite of his own, smooth from keyboards and signatures. A thought arrived uninvited. This man fixes what I do not know how to fix. In the observation glass, Elias caught his reflection next to Henry's shoulder. Two men, same storm, different tools. Shame moved through him, quiet and exact. He thought of Mara's voice in the basement. He let the memory land. "Thank you," Elias said. The words felt small and correct. Henry nodded, neither proud nor modest. Set the alerts to audible. The early warning was there. People heard it but did not listen. Ivy took it like instruction, not rebuke. "I will change the profile now." The technician tried to joke and failed. "I owe you a coffee." "Keep the aisles clear," Henry said. "That is enough." Outside the glass, thunder rolled, but in the server room the sound softened, as if the building had exhaled. Elias turned toward the door, expecting Henry to vanish the way he always did, but Henry lingered, looking at the condensation drying along the copper line. He touched the pipe lightly. "Anchor the line here, and you stop the chatter." "What chatter?" Elias asked, honest curiosity in his voice. "The rattle that keeps people from hearing what matters," Henry said. "Vibration hides warnings." Elias heard the other meaning. He gave a small nod, a promise to carry the line forward. They left the room together. The amber tiles cooled to green. Somewhere below, an elevator chimed, a domestic sound inside a night of storms. Respect, a strange and simple thing, opened in Elias like a door he had not known was locked. Not triumph, not relief, respect. By the following afternoon, the storm had cleared, but the air in the building felt different. The server room incident was already making quiet rounds among the senior staff. Most of them spoke in cautious praise, avoiding Elias's name when they mentioned the man who had saved the company's core systems. Evie sat at her desk, scanning through facility reports and staff files. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard longer than usual. Henry's name had always been background, appearing on shift schedules and janitorial duty logs, but now she typed it deliberately. Henry Cole. Employed 3 years. No incidents. Perfect attendance. The personnel file was thin, but a training record caught her eye. Certifications in emergency response, fire suppression, and hazardous environment repair. Completed with distinction. Ivy frowned. That wasn't the kind of resume you built sweeping floors. She leaned back, considering. Most people in this building passed through Henry's orbit without seeing him, but the image of his hands steady on that copper line in the server room lingered in her mind. The file listed his supervisor, Mrs. Alvarez, head of the night cleaning crew. Ivy found her in the staff lounge near the service elevators, sipping tea from a travel mug, her gray hair pinned back neatly. "Mrs. Alvarez," Ivy began, keeping her tone neutral, "do you have a moment to talk about one of your team? Henry Cole." Mrs. Alvarez's expression softened instantly. "Henry? Of course. What did he fix now?" Ivy hesitated. "You sound like that's a regular thing." Mrs. Alvarez chuckled. "More often than anyone notices. He's the one who spots things before they break. Door hinges, boiler pressure, the way the freight elevator shutters before a cable frays. He does it quietly. People think it's luck that nothing fails on our shift. Ivy took a seat across from her. His file shows he's trained for emergencies. Was he military? Not exactly, Mrs. Alvarez said. He was some kind of engineer before. Never told me all the details, but the way he moves, you can tell. He measures twice, acts once, and he never wastes words. The older woman sipped her tea, then leaned forward slightly. You want to know the truth about Henry? It's not the training that makes him different. It's the way he looks after people. What do you mean? Ivy asked. Mrs. Alvarez's smile turned wistful. Last winter, when we had that blackout, we were stuck here, past midnight. Cafeteria was closed, vending machines half empty. The security guard on the east dock hadn't eaten since his shift started. Henry went down to the storage, found his own dinner, cold rice and beans in a lunchbox, and gave it to the guard. Said he'd eat later, but I knew he didn't have anything else. He worked the rest of the night on coffee from the break room. Ivy blinked. Why? Mrs. Alvarez shrugged as if the answer was obvious. Because someone was hungrier than him. For a moment, Ivy didn't speak. She thought of the way Henry had wrapped the blanket around Mara and Jonah in the basement, how natural it had looked. Not like charity, like instinct. Mrs. Alvarez set down her mug. You want to understand Henry? Watch how he listens. Not just to people. He listens to the building, the weather, the way the air moves. It's the same with people. He notices what others ignore. Ivy felt a strange pull in her chest. She had built her career on anticipating problems before they reached Elias's desk. But she realized now her work was about optics and mitigation. Henry's was about prevention and care. She glanced at the time. Thank you, Mrs. Alvarez. That was helpful. As Ivy stood to leave, Mrs. Alvarez added, Miss Ivy, you should know, Henry doesn't like the spotlight. He's had enough of that in another life. If you're digging because of what happened last night, be careful what you stir up. Some stories are heavy to carry. The elevator doors closed behind Ivy, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about the embroidered letters on the blanket, R.C., and the way Henry's gaze had lingered on them. The initials meant something. She could feel it, the way a thread pulls at the edge of fabric. She didn't know yet if she was ready to tug on that thread, but she knew she couldn't look at Henry Cole as just the janitor anymore. And, somewhere deep down, Ivy suspected that whatever story Henry carried, it was going to change the way everyone in this building saw him, including Elias Grant. It was nearly 7 in the evening when the building's intercom crackled with a faint, static-laced announcement. Most of the daytime staff had gone home, leaving the marble lobby quiet except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. Evie was in the reception area, sorting through a delivery of envelopes when she heard the sound. 2 sharp thuds, followed by a faint metallic groan. She froze, head tilted. It came again, this time paired with the muffled echo of a child's voice. Jonah? Her heels clicked against the polished floor as she crossed to the nearest elevator bank. The indicator lights were frozen between floors 17 and 18. She pressed the call button, but the doors stayed shut. That was when she heard it more clearly. Mara's frightened voice, higher-pitched now. Jonah, it's shaking. Ivy's stomach tightened. She reached for her phone, but before she could dial, a low, calm voice came from behind her. Which car? She turned. Henry was already walking toward her, tool bag in hand, eyes locked on the stuck indicator. 17 to 18, she said. Mara and Jonah are inside. Henry didn't ask questions. He dropped the bag, crouched to unzip it, and pulled out a small flashlight and a flat pry bar. Call security to kill power to that shaft, he said evenly, and tell them to keep it off until I say otherwise. Ivy relayed the order into her phone, voice steady out of sheer will. Henry was already moving, scanning the ceiling for the service hatch access. He found it in the corner panel and keyed it open with a narrow steel pick. The hatch creaked, and warm, mechanical air spilled out. "Kids," he called upward, his voice carrying a weight that seemed to anchor the panic in the air. "It's Henry. You're safe. I'm coming in." Inside the elevator, Mara's crying stopped mid-breath. Jonah's voice was quiet but firm. "We hear you." Henry hauled himself up through the hatch with the ease of someone who had done this before. Inside, the lights flickered against the brushed steel walls. The car had settled at a slight angle, making the floor uneven. Mara clung to her brother's arm, eyes wide. "Okay," Henry said, crouching to their level. "We're going to leave this box and go up to the hallway. You'll go first, Jonah, then Mara. Hold my hand and do not let go." He positioned himself under the service hatch, lifting Jonah through to the open shaft where a security guard waited to pull him onto the landing. Mara hesitated, glancing back at the motionless doors. Henry met her eyes. "I've got you." She stepped forward, small hand slipping into his. Her fingers barely wrapped halfway around his own, yet her grip was fierce. He lifted her up gently, passing her into the guard's arms. Once both children were clear, Henry climbed out after them, swinging down onto the hallway floor in a single controlled movement. Jonah immediately wrapped both arms around his sister, shielding her from the view of the open shaft. Elias arrived at that moment, breathless, eyes scanning for his children. "Mara! Jonah!" They ran to him. He knelt, hugging them tightly, murmuring reassurances. Over their heads, his gaze met Henry's. Henry stepped forward, stopping just close enough to extend his hand. Not the formal business handshake of boardrooms, but something older, quieter. He placed Mara's small palm into Elias's. That motion, that transfer, was deliberate. It was the hand of respect, an unspoken acknowledgement that the child was safe, that the responsibility had been honored and returned without debt. Elias's eyes dropped to the hand that had just returned his daughter. The skin was weathered, lined, the nails short and squared. There were small scars across the knuckles, each one a memory of work that demanded both strength and care. He looked then at his own hand, still holding Mara's, smooth, manicured, pale from office light and air conditioning. In that instant, the contrast was impossible to ignore. One hand protected through presence, the other provided through absence. Elias swallowed, feeling the quiet truth press against him. Strength was not the privilege of those at the top, but the discipline of those who showed up when it mattered. Jonah tugged at his sleeve. "He wasn't scared, Dad, even when it shook." Elias glanced back at Henry. "I believe that." Henry only gave a small nod, retrieving his tool bag from the floor. "Get them checked by medical, just in case. Elevators have a way of rattling the bones." Evie stepped in as Elias straightened. "Power's off. Maintenance is on the way to clear the line. It was a bad sensor reading." Henry corrected her gently. "It was the governor wheel catching. Happens when the housing isn't serviced on schedule. Make sure they check the casing." Then, without waiting for thanks, he moved toward the stairwell, the bag slung over one shoulder. Elias watched him go, Mara's fingers still curled into his palm. The image of that other hand, calloused, scarred, steady, stayed in his mind like a brand. And somewhere in the back of his thoughts the question whispered again, "What kind of man do I want my children to believe I am?" The answer, for the first time in years, felt uncertain. By the next morning, the storm outside had passed, but another was brewing inside the glass walls of Grant Holdings. It started with a headline splashed across a digital news feed. "Janitor found sleeping with CEO's children during storm blackout." The photo was grainy, clearly taken from a distance, but it showed enough. 2 sleeping children curled against Henry's chest, a blanket around them. By noon, the story had spread from gossip blogs to major business sites. Social media was eating it alive. The wording was deliberate, suggestive, engineered to make readers fill in their own scandalous details. In the boardroom, the air was sharp with tension. The long mahogany table was ringed with familiar faces, each one lit by the cold blue glow of the wall screen. The headline loomed over them like a verdict. Victor Hale sat near the center, hands folded, voice dripping with false concern. We all appreciate loyalty, Elias, but optics matter. This image, it's a problem. It's not what it looks like, Elias said, jaw tight. Henry kept them warm during the power outage. That's all. Victor leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing just enough to register satisfaction. Unfortunately, the market doesn't care about context. Investors see scandal, and scandal bleeds value. One of the older board members cleared his throat. Our shares have dropped 3 points since this morning. If this keeps trending, we could lose another 5 by end of week. Elias glanced toward Ivy, who stood at the far end of the room. She said nothing, but the stiffness in her shoulders told him she had already traced the leak. Victor was too polished to leave fingerprints, but the timing was perfect. Too perfect. A woman from the PR department slid a folder across the table. Damage control means swift action. We recommend an immediate suspension pending investigation. That way, we show transparency. Elias's fingers tightened on the edge of the table. You're suggesting we fire a man who saved my children because of a headline written to sell ad space? Victor spread his hands, palms up, a gesture of reason, though his tone was anything but. I'm suggesting we protect the company. Right now, Henry is a liability. You have to think about your role as a father and as a CEO. If you can't protect your own children's image, how can you protect the company's? The words landed harder than Elias expected. There it was, the real strike. This wasn't just an attack on Henry, it was an attack on him, on his worthiness as a father. Around the table, there were nods. No one wanted to be the dissenting voice when the market was watching. Elias straightened. Henry stays. I'll issue a statement myself. Victor's mouth curved slightly as though amused by the defiance. Do as you wish, but remember, this is not just your reputation on the line. It's ours. The meeting broke, murmurs trailing behind the departing members. Elias stayed seated, staring at the photo still glowing on the screen. The children looked peaceful in Henry's arms, more peaceful than they ever did in his. Outside the glass walls, Ivy waited. You know, it was him, she said quietly. Elias didn't answer. He didn't have to. Victor's hand was all over this, layered in plausible deniability, calculated to draw blood without leaving a trace. Henry doesn't deserve this, she added. No, Elias said finally, but he's not the only one being tested here. He stood, the decision forming in his mind. If Victor thought this was enough to make him cut Henry loose, he was wrong. This was no longer just about the company's image. This was about fighting for something Victor could never understand, loyalty that wasn't for sale. As he left the room, the stock ticker on the lobby wall flashed red, the numbers dipping lower. But Elias's eyes were already fixed on something else, the image of that worn blanket with 2 faded letters, RC, stitched into its edge. He didn't know why it mattered yet. But instinct told him the truth was there, and if Victor had started a war, Elias intended to finish it. The building was quiet now, emptied of the day's noise. City lights flickered against the glass, casting long shadows across the 42nd floor. Elias stood by the corner window of his office, jacket draped over the back of his chair, sleeves rolled to the elbow. The scandal still clung to the air like smoke, but it wasn't the market numbers that had kept him here past midnight. It was the image, his children asleep in Henry's arms, burned into the back of his mind. Footsteps approached from behind. Slow, measured. Henry entered without ceremony, wearing the same dark work jacket he always did. His hands were stained faintly with oil as though he had come straight from some repair. You wanted to see me, Henry said simply. Elias didn't turn immediately. Yes. Sit. Henry remained standing. Elias exhaled sharply, then faced him. "Tell me something. Why didn't you say you were an engineer?" Henry's gaze was steady, almost unreadable. "Because you never asked." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full, thick with the truth Elias didn't want to face. He had been so accustomed to looking through people that he had stopped seeing them entirely. He crossed to his desk, resting both hands on the edge. "You could have avoided half of this if people knew your background. You could clear your name." Henry shook his head. "That's not why I'm here. And if your board wants to fire me, they'll find a reason. Engineer or janitor." Elias's voice dropped almost to a confession. "I built an empire from nothing. I've turned hostile takeovers into assets, forced competitors to sell me their companies over lunch. But last week, during that blackout, I couldn't even keep my own children warm." His eyes locked on Henry's. "You did it, with a single blanket." Henry's expression softened only slightly. It wasn't the blanket. It was being there. Those 3 words landed like a quiet blow. Elias leaned back against the desk, feeling the weight of them settle in his chest. He had been absent for years, not in the physical sense, but in the moments that counted. "I don't understand you," Elias admitted. "Most men with your skill set would be chasing the next contract, the next title. Instead, you mop floors in a building run by people who don't even remember your name." Henry's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Titles didn't save my daughter. A contract didn't bring her back. Being there might have. I'm not making that mistake twice." Elias studied him carefully. There was no bitterness in Henry's tone, just a steady truth. The initials RC flashed in his mind again, stitched into the edge of that worn blanket. He almost asked. Almost. But the words caught in his throat. Some things needed to be earned before they were told. Instead, he said, "Victor's not finished. He thinks he can push you out to get to me. And, if I'm honest, he's not wrong about one thing. You're in my line of fire." Henry's posture didn't change. "Then I guess we'll see if you're worth standing next to." It wasn't defiance. It was a challenge, the kind that tests the spine of the man hearing it. Elias felt something shift. For years, power had been a currency he measured in numbers and leverage. Tonight, it was in the hands of a man with no office, no stock options, no need to impress anyone. He crossed the room, stopping just in front of Henry. "You're not just staying. You're going to help me make this right." Henry didn't blink. "For your image?" Elias shook his head. "For my children." For a moment, the 2 men stood in quiet recognition of what had just been said. Not a truce exactly, but the beginning of one. Henry gave a single nod. "Then I'll be there." As he left, Elias looked at his own hands. Smooth, manicured, marked by nothing heavier than a pen. Then he thought of Henry's hands, rough and scarred, the kind that could hold a wrench or a frightened child with equal steadiness. For the first time in a long time, Elias wondered if strength had nothing to do with the kind of empire you built, and everything to do with the lives you chose to hold. The night conversation ended with a fragile truce. Henry took the stairs to the service level. Elias stayed at the window, the city glowing like a circuit board. He did not see Ivy in the hallway, eyes on her tablet, urgency tightening her jaw. She had been digging since dawn. The tabloid photo sent her through camera logs and badge reports. That search forked into another. The initials on the blanket would not let go. RC. She typed them beside a hard guess that felt necessary. Ruth Cole. The first hits were faint. A coroner's list from 8 years ago, a municipal report on a residential fire at a new build called Lakeside Grove. 23 units. 1 child dead. The boiler room was the ignition point. An appendix noted ventilation faults and uncertified substitutions during late-stage construction. Ivy pulled the thread. The developer was Meridian Ridge Homes. The contractor was North Caldera Build. Procurement ran through a private equity portfolio company that later dissolved. She followed the rebrandings like footprints in wet cement. A filing surfaced an old manager, HST Capital, Hale Strategic Trust. She mapped the dates. 8 years earlier, Victor Hale chaired the HST Operations Committee. Court archived minutes recorded a cost mitigation directive for Lakeside Grove Phase 2. Replace specified steel ducting with composite. Reduce redundant alarm sensors. Approve alternative suppression vendor if under budget by 10%. Electronic signatures sat at the bottom. One name repeated, Victor Hale. She searched for the name Cole. An affidavit from a wrongful death claim appeared, dismissed after a settlement with non-disclosure. The father attended 2 hearings, then stopped. The child's name was redacted in most copies, visible in a paper scan. Ruth Cole. Age 8. Ivy closed her eyes. The neat stitches on the blanket. The way Henry's fingers paused at the frayed edge. She printed the stack and walked to Elias's office. He had shifted from window to desk, the posture of a man who had built a fortress and found a door open. Inside it. If this is about PR, save it for morning, he said. It is about cause and consequence, she replied. She set the papers down. The top page showed the HST letterhead and the cost directive. Elias read standing. His eyes tracked the columns, then stopped at the signature block. He did not speak. She turned to the next pages. The municipal report, the procurement variance, the affidavit, the name. Ruth Cole. He looked up, a question and a confession in one breath. You are certain? I verified the corporate lineage twice, Ivy said. Victor's committee drove the changes. The contractor substituted cheaper materials after that directive. The fire began where the substitutions were made. He placed a palm on the desk. Images arrived uninvited. The blanket in Henry's arms. Mara whispering "Daddy" in her sleep. The server room's breath when Henry gave it air. A blue signature under a memo that saved money and cost a life. I knew the system was ruthless, Elias said. I did not know it was this precise. You built a company that tries to do things right, Ivy answered. Some of the men beside you do not. Henry lives in the wreckage of a decision that paid bonuses to a room he will never enter. Elias sat, not to retreat, but to face it. He is not an accessory to my story. I am an accessory to his. Silence settled, clarifying. What are you going to do? Ivy asked. Stop pretending this is only about optics, Elias said, and stop letting a man who treats risk like a game define us. He lifted the affidavit, tracing the stamp. He wondered what it cost Henry to sign away the fight. He wondered if the blanket was the only thing the court could not seal. Does he know we know? He asked. Henry or Victor? Both. Victor will know when the board calendar updates, she said. Henry will know when you act. Elias stood. The decision felt less like a leap and more like gravity. Prepare a special session. Retain outside counsel. Have facilities pull maintenance records for vendors Victor pushed. Ivy nodded, then paused. There is one more thing. The photo from the basement was taken by a guest badge that never checked out. Its issuer was Victor. Elias's jaw tightened. The layered antagonist had layered one cut too many. He pictured Henry choosing warmth while someone framed it as a scandal for profit. He looked at his reflection in the glass, then at the city rewarding speed and punishing pauses. I stood in rooms like that once, he said. I thought winning meant not looking down. And now? Ivy asked. Now I look down, Elias said, and I see the man holding my children when I did not. He closed the file. The initials on the blanket no longer floated as a riddle. They weighed what they were. A name. A loss. A vow. He reached for his phone. "Time to move," he said. The call went out at 8 a.m., crisp and calculated. Victor Hale spoke, to the child welfare hotline with a voice tuned for concern. He reported a janitor who had inappropriate contact with the CEO's children during a blackout and who had recently removed them from a stalled elevator against protocol. He suggested the children were afraid. He never gave his name. 2 hours later, a pair of caseworkers stepped into the marble lobby with clipboards and quiet shoes. Ivy met them at the turnstiles, badge lifted, posture steady. She had already guessed who made the call. She led them to a family conference room with soft light and a glass wall that could fog for privacy. Elias entered a moment later with Mara and Jonah. The children were subdued. The sight of strangers with official badges pulled fear up from their stomachs. Mara clutched her sketchbook until the spiral binding bent. Jonah kept glancing toward the service corridor as if he could see Henry through the walls. The senior caseworker introduced herself as Ms. Green. Her tone was professional, not unkind. She explained that an anonymous report had raised concerns about safety and boundaries. She asked her routine questions. Who was present the night of the storm? Why were the children in the basement? Did the janitor sleep on the floor with them? Did he take them from a stalled elevator without authorization? Mara's chin lifted, small but firm. "He kept us warm," she said. "It was cold and loud, and he made it quiet." Jonah added, "He told the elevator to stop shaking. He knew what to do." Elias placed a hand on the table. "Henry acted to protect my children when I was not there. I take responsibility for that absence." His voice stayed measured. Ivy was already moving. "We would like to provide context," she said, tapping her tablet to the wall screen. "With your permission." Ms. Green nodded. The glass fogged for privacy. The first video appeared, time stamped. It showed the server room on the night of the storm. Heat haze, blinking LEDs, and Henry moving with practiced certainty. A technician's voice confirmed the arrays were at risk. Henry directed the bypass, adjusted the dampers, and saved the system without a full shutdown. "That shows technical skill," Ms. Green said, "but our concern is his contact with the children." "Understood," Ivy replied. She switched clips. The feed from the elevator landing appeared. Mara and Jonah emerged through the service hatch one at a time, guided by Henry. There was no panic, no hesitation. After both were safe, Henry offered Mara's hand to Elias in a deliberate transfer, like a ceremony. Miss Green leaned forward. "Who cut the power to the shaft?" "Security," Ivy said. "At Henry's request. Facilities replaced the housing afterward." Elias spoke quietly. "My children were in danger. The man you are asking about got them out." Ms. Green made notes. Her colleague, Mr. Ortiz, watched the screen and then the children. "I would like to speak to the janitor," he said. Henry entered on Ivy's text. He wore his work jacket, no tools. He nodded to the caseworkers, then to the children. Mara stood halfway, unsure if she could move. Ms. Green said, "Go ahead." Mara crossed the room and wrapped her arms around Henry's waist. Jonah followed, standing close. Henry did not lift them. He rested a hand on each shoulder, steady and respectful. Ms. Green studied the body language, attachment without fear, trust without secrecy. She looked at Elias. "Do you consent to staff speaking on the record?" "I do," Elias said. "We invited a witness." The door opened. Mrs. Alvarez stepped in with a folder. She wore her night shift sweater and the calm of long years on the job. Her testimony was plain. Henry had completed emergency response training with distinction. He shared food on overnights when others had none. He reported hazards before incidents. He had no history of boundary violations. He avoided attention rather than sought it. She placed a worn photo on the table. It showed a child's blanket with small stitched letters, R and C. "He carries this when nights are hard," she said. "It belonged to his daughter. She died in a fire. He does not let children be cold." Silence settled, clear and weighted. Miss Green closed her pen. "We are not here to punish kindness," she said. "We are here to ensure safety. Based on the evidence, this complaint appears retaliatory." She turned to the children. "Thank you for speaking with us. You did well." Jonah whispered, "Can Henry stay?" "That decision belongs to your father and his company," Ms. Green said. "From our standpoint, there is no cause to intervene." The glass unfogged. Outside, the lobby moved at its normal pace again. Ms. Green and Mr. Ortiz packed their files. At the door, she paused. "Mr. Grant, if further anonymous reports arrive, we will note the pattern." The meaning was clear. She had seen this tactic before. When the caseworkers left, Elias faced his children. "You are safe," he said. He looked at Henry. "And you are staying." Ivy exhaled for the first time in an hour. Her phone buzzed. A message from legal confirmed the special board session. Another flagged an unregistered guest badge used the night the basement photo was taken. Issuer: Victor. Elias met Ivy's eyes. She nodded. The next step was already in motion. He turned back to Henry and extended his hand, not as a transaction, but as acknowledgement. "Thank you," he said, "for the basement, for the elevator, for this." Henry accepted the handshake, firm and brief. "Be there," he said. "I will," Elias answered. Mara placed her small hand over theirs. Jonah did the same. It was a new picture, not the one Victor wanted, not the one the tabloids sold. A quiet covenant in a glass room where power had tried to turn love into evidence and failed. Outside, the storm had broken. Sunlight cut through thinning clouds and lit the marble floors. The building breathed. The conference hall was already full when Elias Grant stepped onto the stage. Cameras clicked in rapid bursts, their flashes scattering like lightning across the polished backdrop. Investors, employees, and journalists filled every row, expecting a triumphant announcement about the pending merger, a deal Victor had been grooming for months. Elias stood at the podium, fingers brushing the edge. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in boardrooms, but today's script was different. The teleprompter scrolled the approved statement. He ignored it. "Before we address business matters," Elias began, his voice steady but stripped of its usual armor, "I need to speak about a man who works in this building. You know him as a janitor. My children know him as the man who kept them safe when I did not." The room shifted. A ripple moved through the crowd. Reporters exchanged quick glances, sensing the scent of something unscripted. "During the storm," Elias continued, "our server infrastructure was seconds away from catastrophic loss. He stopped it. When the elevator failed with my children trapped inside, he got them out. Calm, unharmed. That man is Henry Cole." The cameras found Henry at the side of the stage, standing in his work jacket, his hands folded in front of him. He looked out of place among the suits, but not uncomfortable. Elias's tone deepened. "The gossip you've read is false. Henry Cole did not endanger my family. He saved them, and in doing so he reminded me of the difference between building an empire and protecting what truly matters." The statement hit the room like a bell tolling in a quiet church. Some executives shifted uneasily. Victor, seated near the front, leaned back with an expression between disbelief and contempt. Elias stepped away from the podium. His shoes echoed on the stage as he crossed to Henry. The audience fell silent. In full view of the cameras, Elias bowed his head, not a nod of acknowledgement but a deliberate gesture of humility. It was a sight no one in the room expected. The billionaire who was known for never yielding, showing deference to the man who swept his floors. Flashes exploded. Someone in the back gasped. "This is my public correction," Elias said into the nearest microphone. "My apology and my thanks." Henry's expression did not change much, but something in his eyes eased, as though an invisible weight had shifted. He gave a short nod. "Take care of them," he said simply. The moment could have stood as the closing beat, redemption sealed in front of witnesses. But Victor was not done. He rose from his seat, buttoning his jacket with a slow precision. "That's touching, Elias," he said, loud enough for the microphones to catch. "But while you're rewriting fairy tales, you might want to explain to the board why you're canceling a deal worth $500 million. Or maybe explain to the shareholders why you're keeping an employee who's been a distraction to your family." The temperature in the room dropped. Victor was careful. Every word framed as concern. Every insinuation sharpened just enough to wound without drawing legal blood. Elias faced him. "I'm canceling the deal," he said, "because I will not do business with a partner who compromises safety for profit. And as for distractions—" He stopped, letting the silence gather weight. Ivy moved before Victor could fill it. She walked to the side podium, a thin folder in her hand. "With permission," she said. Elias nodded. She opened the folder and began to read. Records obtained from public safety investigations confirmed that a fire 6 years ago, which killed 1 child and injured 4 others, was caused by substandard wiring installed by a subcontractor. That subcontractor was owned by a shell corporation registered under Hale Industrial Holdings. Mr. Victor Hale is the majority shareholder of that holding company. The words landed like hammer strikes. The crowd froze. Henry did not move, but his jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Mara's stitched initials, R.C., flashed in Elias's memory. "This is not rumor," Ivy continued, sliding copies of the documents to the front table for the press. "This is a matter of record. The same man attempting to discredit Henry Cole was financially tied to the negligence that took his daughter's life." The cameras swiveled to Victor. His jaw locked, but his eyes darted to the exits. A low murmur swelled into a wave of voices. Board members whispered among themselves, expressions hardening. Elias spoke again, his voice cutting through the noise. "We talk about integrity in this company. Today, we put those words into action. The deal is off. Henry stays, and anyone who believes safety and dignity are negotiable is free to find the door." The applause began hesitantly, then built into something sustained, not polite but resolute. Some stood, reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Victor remained still for a beat longer, then turned on his heel and left, his retreat caught by every camera in the room. Elias looked back to Henry. In the clamor, their eyes met. No speeches were needed. The bow, the truth, and the defense had spoken for themselves. In the back of the hall, Mrs. Alvarez wiped her eyes. Ivy closed the folder. Mara and Jonah, watching from the wings, clapped with small but determined hands. It was not just a press conference anymore. It was a reckoning, broadcast live. And the man who once stood invisible in the shadows now stood in the brightest light the city could offer, without bending, without breaking, and without asking for it. The conference hall still hummed with the aftershock of Ivy's disclosure. Reporters spoke into phones, their voices urgent, transmitting every detail. The weight of what had been said had not yet settled when Elias stepped back to the podium. The lights caught the edge of his jaw, firm now, no trace of the guarded hesitation that had defined him weeks ago. "I have one more thing to say," he announced, his voice cutting cleanly through the room. Conversations stopped. Pens lifted from notepads. He took a document from Ivy and held it up, not to wave like a prop, but to display like evidence in a courtroom. "This," Elias said, "is an investigative brief compiled over the last 48 hours. It contains financial records, procurement emails, and correspondence that directly link Hale Industrial Holdings to the subcontractor responsible for the fire that killed Ruth Cole, Henry's daughter, and injured 4 others." The sound in the room thickened. It was no longer the noise of curiosity, but the crackle of collective outrage. Elias continued, "These are not unverified claims. These are documents signed, dated, and backed by chain of custody from public safety offices. Invoices showing inferior electrical wiring purchased below code requirements. Approval stamps from Victor Hale's office authorizing those purchases. Henry stood at the side of the stage, his face still, but a faint muscle in his cheek tightened as the words reached him. This was not just a rumor, not just suspicion. It was the truth spoken aloud in a room full of witnesses. Elias scanned the crowd, his gaze settling briefly on the board members in the front row. For too long, we have let profit shield negligence. Today, that shield is gone. I am ordering an independent investigation, not run by our internal legal team, not filtered through public relations, but led by an outside agency with full access to our records. Every contract, every bid, every safety inspection. He paused, letting the weight of his words land. And that includes the chairman of this board. No one is above this process. Not the CEO, not the co-founder, not even the man who helped build this company from the ground up. If you were involved, you will answer for it. The statement was an earthquake under the table where the board sat. Some shifted uncomfortably, others leaned forward already calculating the damage. But Elias didn't flinch. This is not about settling personal scores, he went on. It is about acknowledging that a life was lost because corners were cut. And those corners were cut here, under our roof, by someone in a position of trust. If we let that stand, then this company is exactly as hollow as our critics say. Victor, who had remained in his seat through the earlier exchange, now rose halfway as if to interrupt. Elias held up a hand, not a gesture of aggression, but of finality. You've had your say, Victor. Now the truth will speak. Gasps rippled when Elias turned the documents over to two uniformed investigators standing at the side of the room. Their presence was quiet but undeniable. This was no internal memo. This was the start of a legal trail. Cameras zoomed in on. The moment the folder changed hands. Ivy stepped closer, her expression unreadable, but her posture radiated certainty. Mrs. Alvarez, in the back, clasped her hands together so tightly her knuckles whitened. Henry's gaze lowered briefly, not out of defeat, but in a silent acknowledgement to the memory of his daughter. The initials on the old blanket, R.C., seemed to press invisibly against the air between them. Elias returned to the microphone. We can rebuild servers after a storm. We can repair elevators, but we cannot restore a life once it is taken. The only thing we can do is face the truth and make certain it never happens again. There was a pause then, the kind that felt like the room itself was inhaling. Outside, the rain had slowed, the last streaks of water sliding down the tall glass windows. A reporter's voice cut through. Mr. Grant, aren't you afraid this investigation will damage the company's reputation? Elias didn't look away. I am more afraid of what happens if we don't. The simplicity of the answer drew a murmur of approval from unexpected corners of the room. Even a few board members nodded. It was not the language of damage control, but of someone who had decided to stop calculating risk at the expense of integrity. Victor's chair scraped against the floor as he stood fully now, his jaw locked. He didn't speak this time. Instead, he turned sharply and walked toward the exit, his departure followed by every lens in the room. The cameras caught the stiff set of his shoulders, the way no one reached to shake his hand. When the doors closed behind him, the tension shifted. It wasn't release yet, but it was movement toward it. Elias looked to Henry, and for a brief moment the two men stood in silent recognition of the path that had brought them here. One forged in loss, the other in reluctant transformation. The conference moderator stepped forward to signal the end, but Elias raised a hand once more. Let the record show, he said, that this company is committed to accountability, even when it costs us. Especially when it costs us. That is how we honor the people who should still be here. The words landed with the same quiet force as a gavel in a courtroom. They were not shouted. They did not need to be. The press conference closed not with applause, but with a charged silence, one heavy with the knowledge that something irreversible had begun. And in that silence, the truth had finally stepped out of the shadows, carrying the weight of a little girl's name stitched into a worn blanket, and the promise that her story would not be buried again. The day after the press conference, the building felt different. It was not the kind of difference that comes from headlines, but the kind that reorganizes air and light. People lowered their voices in hallways, not out of fear, but out of attention. Doors stayed open longer. Eyes met. Elias began with policy, not promises. At a town hall, held on the mezzanine, he stood without a podium, sleeves rolled, voice steady. "We change how we work today," he said, "not in theory, in practice." Ivy distributed a one-page sheet, plain and direct. At the top, the Ruth Standard. Below it, a new set of rules that did not need corporate poetry to be understood. Rule 1. Any employee, security, service, contractor can halt a process on a credible safety concern. No retaliation, no penalty, immediate review. Rule 2. Night shift is not a footnote. Security and service leaders will hold permanent seats on the Emergency Readiness Council and the Vendor Ethics Committee. Rule 3. Every system gets a breathing check. Cooling, ventilation, elevators, electrical. Alerts shift from silent pop-ups to audible cues. People will listen before things break. Rule 4. Vendors sign a non-negotiable clause, meet code, or lose contract. Breaches trigger public disclosure, not private settlement. Rule 5. Transfer of care is a protocol, not an accident. When a child or vulnerable person moves from one guardian to another, hands meet, eyes meet, names are spoken. The hand of respect becomes policy. There was no applause. There didn't need to be. Mrs. Alvarez read every line like a prayer. The head of security nodded once as if a weight he carried had finally been named. Technicians looked at one another and quietly admitted how often they had muted alarms. Elias introduced the final item. "We have a new role," he said. "Night shift safety and culture advisor. It belongs to someone who knows how to listen when a building whispers." He turned. Henry stepped forward. He wore the same work jacket, but the space around him had changed. Not deference, attention. He did not give a speech. He gave instructions. "We walk," he said, "every night. We listen for rattles, feel for heat with the back of a hand, and check the doors people prop open when they are tired. We write down what is ignored. We fix what we can. We ask for help when we cannot." He opened a small notebook and held it up. On the first page, a simple list: server room clamp, east dock draft, freight elevator wheel. After it, one more line: people get tired at 3 a.m. Bring coffee. Laughter moved through the mezzanine, light and clean. It was not at Henry. It was with him. That night, the transformation began with small rituals. Security guards learned the new audible alarms and practiced responses with Ivy timing the steps. Mrs. Alvarez's crew walked the floors with Henry, flashlights low to the tile finding hairline cracks, listening for the soft apology a loose hinge makes when it wants attention. They spoke in the language of work, short phrases, long silences, a nod that meant understood. In the server room, the stainless cabinet got a new bracket. The copper line anchored where Henry had tapped it with 2 fingers. Beside the panel, with Henry's consent, a small brass plate was mounted. The Ruth Standard. Safety is love, measured. The original blanket stayed with Henry, folded away. The plate was not grief on display. It was a reminder that systems exist for people, not the other way around. Ivy set up a midnight open-channel check-in. Anyone on night duty could call a direct line and speak to a human within 3 rings. The first call came from a custodian worried about a space heater under a desk on 23. The second from a rookie guard who didn't like the sound the west stairwell door made when the wind shifted. Both were logged. Both were fixed before dawn. Elias walked with Henry that first night. He said little. He let the quiet teach him. At the freight elevator, Henry ran his palm along the governor housing, listening. At the roof hatch, he checked the latch and then the sky, as if reading a forecast only he could see. At the nursery room where Mara sometimes napped on late days, he slowed and glanced at Elias. The father opened the door, checked the window seal, straightened a blanket. When they reached the lobby, the head of security met them. "The council is ready," he said. "We have vendor files that need eyes." "Bring them," Elias answered. "Start with the ones everyone assumes are fine." The phrase moved through the building like a current. Start with the assumptions. Challenge the convenient. Put hands where spreadsheets cannot reach. By week's end, the change had texture. An electrician slowed to show a cleaner how to hear the difference between a fan bearing and a belt slipping. A receptionist learned to read the reflection of an exit sign in glass to catch when a door wasn't seated. The cafeteria left a stack of boxed meals labeled "Night Shift Deserves Hot Food." The gesture wasn't charity, it was parody. On Friday, Henry gathered the night crew in the loading bay for 5 minutes. No formality. "We look out for each other," he said. "We keep score different. Our wins are the things that do not happen." Then he raised his hand, palm open. One by one, security officers, cleaners, and techs lifted theirs to meet it. Not a cheer, a seal. Elias watched from the doorway, unseen. He did not step in. He did not interrupt the moment with a speech. He recognized it for what it was. A culture turning by the pressure of quiet hands. Back upstairs, Mara and Jonah waited with a plate of cookies for the night team. Mara offered Henry the first one, then looked up. "What do you always say?" Henry glanced at Elias, then at the crew heading into the dark corridors that keep a city's glass arteries alive. "Be there," he said, and the building breathed. The afternoon sun poured through the tall glass of the atrium, painting long rectangles of gold on the polished floor. Henry stood by the janitor's cart, coiling the cord of his floor buffer. Elias approached, something folded carefully in his hands. It was the blanket. The one with the faded letters, R.C. only now. The frayed edges had been mended. The stitches were not factory perfect. They were deliberate, each one an act of time and care. "I had it repaired," Elias said. His voice was quieter than the echo of the building. It seemed wrong to let it stay broken. Henry's eyes moved from the blanket to Elias, then to Mara and Jonah, who were sitting on the marble steps nearby, their backpacks open, a small pile of colored pencils between them. Elias held the blanket out, but Henry did not take it for himself. Instead, he walked to Mara, knelt so they were eye level, and gently placed the folded cloth into her arms. "One day," he said, voice steady, "you will give this to someone else who needs it. When that day comes, you will know, and you will remember how it felt to be safe when the world outside was storming." Mara clutched it close, nodding with the kind of solemnity only a child can carry. Jonah leaned against her shoulder, touching the stitched edge with his fingers. Elias stood in silence, watching the exchange. It was not a scene for him to claim. It belonged to them, the man who had kept his children warm when he could not, and the children who now carried that warmth forward. Henry rose, returned to his cart, and pushed it toward the far end of the hall. He picked up the mop, dipping it into the bucket, and began to work the slow, practiced strokes that had kept this floor gleaming long before anyone knew his name. As the mop head traced its wet arc, Henry spoke, not loudly, not for the crowd, but as if telling the floor itself. "Floors remember," he said. "They remember who stood steady when the whole building shook." Ivy, passing by with a folder under her arm, caught the words. She didn't stop, but a faint smile touched her face. She knew the building had a longer memory now. Near the glass doors, Mrs. Alvarez waved to Henry before heading out, her lunch bag swinging in her hand. Security officers at the desk nodded as he passed, not the casual nod of habit, but the kind that acknowledged place and weight. The light shifted, catching the clean streak of the newly mended blanket as Mara draped it over her knees. Outside, laughter from a group of employees filtered in with the breeze. The sound was light, unforced, filling the wide lobby with a sense of air finally cleared. The camera of the mind would pull back here, Henry in the foreground working his line along the floor, Mara and Jonah by the steps with their blanket, Elias standing near the elevator, watching as if learning a final lesson. No music swelled. The moment didn't need it. The sound of the mop, the laughter, and the warm light were enough. Fade begins. Gold into soft shadow. Before we say goodbye, we would love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee? Or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read every one with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel. Not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry this story with you. And remember, sometimes the miracle does not knock on your door. It waits quietly until you are ready to open your heart. Take care, and we will see you in the next story. Fade out on the last stroke of Henry's mop, the shine it leaves behind catching the light one final time.